My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 38 years old, and the last time most of my family saw me, they were pretty sure I was sleeping in my car and living off food stamps. That's what happens when you don't post on Facebook for years and never come home for the holidays. I showed up at my father's funeral wearing a plain black dress, a secondhand coat, and scuffed shoes I hadn't polished in weeks. My hair was tied back in a simple knot, with no makeup and no jewelry. I remember how their eyes scanned me as I walked into the church, not in grief, in judgment. My aunt whispered something to my cousin as I walked past. Her voice wasn't loud, but I caught the words anyway. "She looks rough. Poor girl never got back on her feet." My cousin didn't argue, just nodded like it was a fact. My sister Vanessa was at the front, dressed like she was attending a gala. Perfect hair, tailored suit, and a designer handbag. She didn't bother putting down. Even at the altar, she saw me, gave a small, stiff smile, then turned back to the priest like I hadn't just appeared after 5 years of silence. No one asked where I had been. No one pulled me aside to ask how I was holding up. They just filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. Probably thought I'd dropped out of life. Maybe thought I was embarrassed to ask for help. I didn't correct them. I let them believe it. Truth is, I work in military intelligence. I've been deployed more times than I can count. I've served in conflict zones and classified operations in countries they couldn't point to on a map. My job has layers of clearance so tight I can't even tell my own mother what I do. But none of that mattered here. In this town, in this church, among these people, I was just the daughter who disappeared after college and never quite made it. And that worked just fine for me. Letting them think I was struggling gave me cover. No questions. No digging. No attention. The less they knew, the safer everyone stayed. But as I stood at the back of the church, listening to the eulogy about a man who raised 2 daughters, one a successful lawyer and the other a disappointment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. I gave up on anger years ago. It was something colder, deeper, like a door slowly creaking open, letting in a kind of silence that wraps around your ribs and squeezes. I didn't cry at the funeral. Not for him, not for the words that were never said, and definitely not for them, but I felt something that day. Like I'd been gone so long, I forgot how it feels to be invisible among people who should know you best. And that kind of hurt stays with you. Quiet. Heavy. Waiting. Vanessa has always been the golden one. The honor student, the homecoming queen, the girl who made straight A's while managing to never break a sweat. She's now a corporate lawyer in D.C., engaged to a man with perfect teeth and an even better investment portfolio. His name is Blake Whitmore. Senior VP at a private bank, country club member, owns a house in Bethesda, and another one in Aspen. My mother once whispered to me that Blake was a catch, like Vanessa had reeled in a prize marlin while the rest of us were throwing back guppies. Everything about Vanessa's life is curated for admiration. Her Instagram looks like a glossy magazine. Brunches with bottomless mimosas, charity galas in floor-length gowns, vacations that involve overwater bungalows and yoga at sunrise. If you asked anyone in our family, they'd tell you Vanessa made it. And that I didn't. To them, I'm the one who couldn't hold a job, never settled down, and probably sleeps on couches when I can't afford rent. It's amazing how a lack of public information turns into a full-blown failure narrative. No one ever stops to ask if there's more to the story. The wedding invitation came in a thick white envelope with embossed lettering and a Tiffany blue lining. I almost didn't open it. I figured it was either a formality or a mistake. But there it was. Vanessa and Blake invite you to their wedding at the Waterford Estate in Virginia. Black tie. No children. Registry. At Bergdorf's. At the bottom, scrawled in Vanessa's signature delicate script, was a note that said, "Rach, I know you've been going through a lot, but please try to dress appropriately. It's important." I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just the wording, it was the tone. Like I was a potential embarrassment she had to manage in advance. Like I was some distant cousin who might show up barefoot and drunk. For a second, I thought about tossing it, just letting the whole thing pass without a response. I mean, what would be the point? I wasn't going to change their opinion of me. That ship sailed a long time ago. But then, something inside me clicked. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe I was tired of being the ghost in the family photo. Either way, I decided I'd go. Not for the wedding. Not for the free food or the music or the awkward small talk with distant relatives. I went because I wanted to look them all in the face and see what they'd do when the failure walked in on her own 2 feet. I didn't RSVP. I didn't send a message or call. I figured, if they thought so little of me, they wouldn't expect me to show. And that was exactly what I wanted. Let them think what they want. I've spent years living under their assumptions. Now it was my turn to play along. The Waterford estate sat like a jewel at the edge of the Potomac. All white columns and manicured hedges. Rows of black cars lined the gravel drive, polished to a mirror shine. Waitstaff in white gloves floated between champagne towers and crystal platters, their movements rehearsed and silent. The guests looked like they'd walked out of a political fundraiser. Sharp suits, couture dresses, conversation filtered through smiles too wide and laughs too careful. Everything about the wedding screamed control, money, and the quiet desperation of people who cared deeply about appearances. I arrived 10 minutes after the ceremony started, on purpose. No one notices late arrivals when the bride is walking down the aisle. My boots were scuffed, my jeans faded, and my coat had a coffee stain I didn't bother to hide. I didn't wear makeup. My hair was pulled back with a drugstore clip. The hostess at the front looked like she'd swallowed something sour when I gave her my name. She hesitated, glanced at a clipboard, then handed me a place card with barely concealed discomfort. "They're already seated," she said. I nodded and walked through the French doors. The ballroom was stunning. White orchids, gold accents, a string quartet, playing something slow and expensive. Vanessa stood at the altar, glowing like a designer ad, her dress sleek and perfect. Blake was beside her, the kind of man who looked like he paid someone to choose his watch. I took a seat in the back row and felt 60 heads turn, just enough to clock my arrival. Nobody said anything, but I could feel them looking. The pity, the discomfort, like I was a mistake that had wandered in from the wrong story. After the ceremony, people broke into cliques. The lawyers talked to the bankers. The aunts found their gossip circles. No one came near me. I stood by the open bar long enough to overhear 2 women whispering about the sister. One said she thought I was in rehab. The other said I'd been seen near a soup kitchen last fall. Dinner was a plated affair under a tent filled with fairy lights. I was seated at the family table, right next to my mother, who tried to smile but looked like she was bracing for impact. Across from me sat Blake's parents, stiff and elegant. His mother didn't acknowledge me. His father gave me a single nod, more of a dismissal than a greeting. Vanessa made her rounds like a politician, hugging guests, sipping from a flute, making sure every moment was captured. When she got to our table, she leaned in and kissed our mother's cheek. Then she turned to me, and her smile faltered. "Rachel," she said, "you made it." I nodded. "You invited me." She laughed lightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I'm glad you're here." "Oh," her fiancé's father looked at me and said, "And what is it you do again, Rachel?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "She's been between jobs. You know how the economy is." Her voice was tight, rehearsed. "Of course," he said. "Always tough for folks with less traditional backgrounds." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of cold glances and forced small talk. Every time someone asked about my work, the conversation would shift awkwardly. Vanessa looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I let it happen. I wasn't there to fit in. I was there to be seen. And based on the way every single person avoided my eyes, it was working. I was standing near the terrace, watching the ocean crash softly against the rocks, when I heard them. Their voices were low, hushed in the way people talk when they think no one's listening. Vanessa and her new mother-in-law stood by the railing, just out of view, but their words carried through the still air like broken glass. "She's harmless," Vanessa was saying. "Just not all there anymore. Years in the military, you know. PTSD or something." Her mother-in-law clicked her tongue. "She looked unwell. Is she staying in a shelter?" Vanessa gave a soft laugh. "Honestly, I don't know. She won't let anyone in. But she's not dangerous, if that's what you're asking." There it was. All laid out in 2 minutes. I wasn't just a failure now. I was the broken veteran. The poor sister. They had to keep explaining away. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Not from embarrassment, but something deeper. It wasn't shame. It was fury. I turned and walked back into the house, barely aware of the chatter around me. The room was spinning a little. Or maybe that was just the weight of all the things I'd never said pressing down at once. I found a quiet study at the end of a hallway, lined with law books and expensive certificates that meant nothing to me. I pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking, but my heart was pounding, like I'd just been dropped into a war zone. I didn't hesitate. I dialed the secure number. "Collins," the voice answered. "Colonel, this is Monroe. I need a favor." There was a pause. "You're supposed to be on leave." "I am. But I need a vehicle. Official plates. And my dress blues." Another pause. "Everything all right, Captain?" "No, sir. It's family. And I need to remind them who they're talking about." He didn't ask for details. "You'll have it in an hour." I hung up and stared out the window for a long time. All the years I'd given. The missions. The lost friends. The secrets that sat like bricks in my chest. And for what? So my sister could reduce me to a walking cautionary tale. So her husband's family could pity me like some damaged stray? I had played the ghost long enough. I had let their assumptions build a prison around me, brick by brick. Each one a lie I let stand, because it was easier than explaining the truth. But now, they weren't just wrong. They were cruel. And I was done being silent. It started with a low hum. Most people didn't notice it at first. Not over the music and clinking glasses. But then the sound grew louder, deeper, unmistakable. Heads turned toward the sky just as the matte gray aircraft cut through the clouds and descended toward the edge of the estate lawn. It wasn't a commercial plane or some fancy private jet. It was military, big, loud, official. It hovered for a few seconds, then settled just beyond the hedges, with a precision that only made it more jarring. The music stopped. The chatter died. People stood frozen. Champagne flutes, halfway to their lips. The judge stiffened. Blake's mother clutched her pearls, like someone had just kicked open the doors of the country club. Vanessa stood near the dance floor, her face blank with confusion. The side hatch opened, and I stepped out. Full dress uniform, every ribbon, every medal, every insignia placed with purpose. My name is stitched clean across my chest. The U.S. Army patch on one shoulder, the military intelligence crest on the other. Rank: Lieutenant Colonel. I walked slowly across the lawn, the gravel crunching under my polished boots. In one hand, I held a leather folder embossed with the Department of Defense seal. In the other, my military ID. As I approached, the crowd parted like they weren't sure whether to salute or run. I stopped at the family table. Everyone was seated, mouths open, stunned, into silence. "Sorry for the disruption," I said. I had to cut my leave short. Judge Whitmore blinked. "What is this?" I placed my credentials on the white linen tablecloth in front of him. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Monroe, Military Intelligence, Special Operations Command. Clearance level Bravo Black. 18 years of service. Vanessa looked like she'd been slapped. Blake's mother leaned closer to the documents with trembling hands, reading the insignia like it might disappear if she blinked. "You're military?" I nodded. "Not just military. Intelligence. I've been deployed more times than I can count. Led operations across 4 continents. Prevented attacks you'll never hear about, and signed orders that don't officially exist. Judge Whitmore reached for the folder like it might bite him. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning the classified clearance, the commendation letters, the deployment list. His face went pale. This is real. It is, I said. Unlike the stories you've all been whispering about me. I turned to Vanessa. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. PTSD? Homeless? Dangerous? That's what you said, right? My voice was calm, controlled, but every word landed like a hammer. You didn't even ask. You just assumed. She swallowed hard. Why didn't you ever tell us? Because I couldn't, I said. Because it's my job not to. But more than that, because none of you ever gave me a reason to. The silence stretched. People were staring now, not at my clothes, not at the way I looked. They were staring because the narrative had shattered. The version of me they'd built in their heads no longer fit the woman standing in front of them in full military dress. I turned back to the judge. Tell me, sir, if I had shown up in this uniform yesterday, would you still have offered me charity? He couldn't answer. Neither could his wife. I gave one last glance around the tent. Champagne still fizzed in half-filled glasses. The string quartet stood awkwardly by their instruments, waiting for some cue that would never come. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said. I've got a plane to catch. Then I turned, walked back toward the helicopter, and left the wedding behind in stunned silence. The guests were gone. The music had stopped. Only the sound of the ocean remained, steady and indifferent as ever. I was standing near the edge of the lawn when Vanessa found me. Her shoes were off, and she was holding them like she'd just run out of excuses. She looked different now. Less perfect. More human. Rachel, she said softly. Can we talk? I nodded. She stood next to me but didn't speak at first. Just stared out at the dark waves. Her breath tight like she was still trying to hold everything together. I'm sorry, she said. Not just for tonight. For all of it. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted to believe her. But apologies come easily when your world gets shaken. What matters is what you do after. She looked at me. Really looked. For the first time in years. I thought I was protecting you. In some messed up way. I told myself that pretending you were lost was better than admitting I didn't understand you. I gave a quiet laugh. You didn't try to understand. You just filled in the blanks with your worst assumptions. She nodded, eyes wet. You're right. I did. I judged you because I didn't know how to deal with feeling smaller than you. I thought I had everything figured out. And you made me feel like I didn't. There was a long silence between us. Not cold, just full. I don't hate you, I said, but I can't forget what's been said either. Words leave marks, Vanessa, especially when they come from family. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Is there any way we can fix this? Maybe, I said, but not with more apologies. If you want a relationship, it starts with honesty. No more pretending to be perfect. No more deciding who I am for me. She nodded. Okay, that's fair. I looked at her, wondering how much of this would last beyond tonight. I'm not asking you to understand my world, but I'm asking you to stop shrinking mine. Just so yours feels bigger. She reached out, hesitant, and touched my arm. Then let's try. No more pretending. I didn't pull away. Trying's a good place to start. Back at base, the world felt quieter. The gates, the concrete, the familiar hum of controlled chaos, it all wrapped around me like armor. I walked past the rows of desks and screens, nodding at the younger officers who barely knew my name but understood the weight I carried. No one here asked about weddings or family politics. They asked about signal intel, threat matrices, and timelines. Here, the work was the language, and I spoke it fluently. I sat down at my station, logged in, and pulled up a threat report. Same mission, same rhythm, but I wasn't the same. Not anymore. I thought about Vanessa's voice at the wedding. That strange mix of shame and pity. She's harmless. Just not all there. I thought about Blake's mother, pursing her lips like I was a stain on her napkin. At least, she's not asking for money tonight. They weren't evil, just blind. And for a long time, I let that blindness pass as truth. What they never understood was that I never needed pity. I needed space. I needed them to ask, not assume. But people like them only see what fits their world. Everything else they file under troubled or less than. The job I do isn't glamorous. There are no medals at breakfast or parades when I land. Most of what I accomplish will never see daylight. But it matters. Every intercepted message, every attack prevented, every life saved because someone, somewhere, stayed invisible long enough to make the right call. That's the choice I made, to serve, to stay silent, to carry a truth so heavy, it pushed out everything else. But that truth has its own kind of power, not the kind that shouts, the kind that waits. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't need to explain. It just needs to be heard. Respect doesn't come from uniforms or credentials. It comes from seeing someone for who they really are, even when that truth makes you uncomfortable. I may not be who they thought I was, but I've always known who I am. And that, finally, is enough.